everyone, welcome back to my channel. My name is Tiara, aka Bookworm Babe, and wow, it's been a while since I've done a video. I'm just gonna skip all the, this is why I haven't made videos and blah blah blah, things have been busy, but that's just the way it goes. We are back and definitely gonna be more consistent with our videos, but I decided to start off 2022 with putting a focus back on reading Indo-Caribbean books and Caribbean books specifically. I think for the last few months of 2021 I was kind of just reading. I mean, I was reading anything I wanted, but they weren't specific to, of course, the Caribbean or anything. Halloween and everything came by and I was reading like some spooky books, and then Christmas came, I was reading Christmas books. So technically the first book that I finished for this year was a Christmas book because I was reading it from last year. Aside from that one Christmas book, I have read 3 pretty cool Indo-Caribbean books. 2 of them I was a huge fan of, and I'm really excited to talk to you guys about them, and hopefully it'll put a few on your recommendation list. So let's jump into it. First book, which is pretty popular, some of you guys might know this one already, is called Cereus Blooms at Night, and this is by Shani Mootoo. This book is, it's not new or anything. It's I think it came out in the early 2000s if I remember correctly, but I really love Shani Mootoo. I first read her work last year. I read He Drowned, She in the Sea, and that would have definitely been reviewed in a past video for sure. I just don't remember specifically when I read it. I think it might have been in the summer, but He Drowned, She in the Sea was a really good book. I really liked it. It was a 5-star review for me. So when I got my hands on this, which was sometime in the fall, and actually, picking it up to read now, I was really excited. Let me tell you guys, the book did not disappoint. The thing I will say first off the bat, there's a lot of trigger warnings within this book. It does deal with mental health, sexual assault, child sexual assault, and it can be a little bit well, not a little bit, it can get quite graphic in a few of the scenes, and even for me it was quite hard to read some of them, again, just because they were graphic. So I just want to put that out there as well if by the end of this you are considering reading the book. The narrator in the story is Tyler. We are first introduced to him, of course, when the story starts. He's a nurse who's working at House, which is kind of like a caring home that is centered on the island of Paradise, which is pretty much likened to Trinidad. Tyler comes into the care of Mala Ramchandran, and he takes to her very quickly. She has a lot of controversies surrounding her, especially on the island. A lot of people are familiar with her backstory, which I won't give away too much of, but she has quite an interesting backstory to say the least, and everyone else is very hesitant about being around her and having her in the home, but Tyler takes to her and just basically gives her the time of day, gives her the patience that she needs, and essentially becomes so wrapped up in finding out more about her story and telling it accordingly. The thing I really like about this book is that it does take us back in time. It kind of goes from past to present, and Shani does an amazing job at doing that without disrupting the flow of the book. So it's never really abrupt of a change, and you can follow it quite easily. So I can really appreciate that. And then before we get into Mala's story, we're taken back to find out more about her father's backstory, and well, her parents in general. So her father is Chandin Ramchandran, and we learn about his background and the fact that he was, taken under the wing of Catholic missionary family, and to spread that word within the Indian Caribbean community on their island. And then it gets a little sticky because he falls in love with his sister. She's not his biological sister by any means, his adopted sister within this family, and because he's not able to, of course, do anything about that, act on that, or attain her in any form, it sort of drives him into a madness of sorts. Like I kind of mentioned before, Mala's story is very, very traumatic. It is very tragic at the same time. There were a lot of parts in the book where I found it a bit difficult to read, not because the writing was bad or anything of that sort, but just because it was very heavy, very graphic, and just by no means something that's easy to digest even as a reader. So again, I'm just putting that out there. But overall, I think one of the biggest themes within this book was mental health. Chandin Ramchandran's mental health deteriorated, and that is what led him to becoming the character that we later see him as in the book, which if you read it you'll know more about. And then his mental health deteriorating also affects his children. Eventually, you know, Mala being the older daughter, there are two daughters, Mala and Asha, and Mala is the older one, and his condition is what led to, you know, her breaking down to a point where her mental health was very you know, it had deteriorated really badly, and she just wasn't able to function and be the way she probably would have been had she not endured all the things that she had before. Honestly, the book, like I said, was great. It is a 5-star read for me. By the end of it, I was hoping for more from Mala, and this is not a complaint towards the book, it's just her character you get very easily attached to, and then when you realize that, you know, it's not that it's not a happy ending, but it's not necessarily the best ending ever for her. You just wish that she had more. But there are so many layers to this story, so many different characters that all play a role. There is a lot of representation of the queer community within the book as well, so that's really cool because we get, you know, some more commentary that way as well. And yeah, it's a must read. Honestly, it was such a good book. The next book that I have is The Man Who Broke the Lottery, and this is by Jagessar. This book I actually had just come across on on Amazon not too long ago, and it sounded really funny. And so often the Indo-Caribbean books that I pick up usually have really heavy topics, so I thought it was cool that there was this book that was clearly, you know, a comedy and would be a much lighter read featuring Indo-Caribbean characters. So ultimately I thought this one was it was still very funny and charming, and it had a lot of potential, but I felt like it needed a few things to really tie it together. So essentially, main character is Sunil Rattan, and he is an accountant living in Toronto, which is in Canada. And one day, you know, Sunil after work, he's going to his local grocery store to check his lottery tickets. You know, like so many of us can probably relate, or, you know, parents, grandparents. He's been playing the lottery since he came to Toronto, basically. So it's been years, and he just always dreads the feeling of when you scan the ticket and you see that dreaded screen that just says not a winning ticket. You know, he's never won more than maybe 20 bucks on a ticket, and it's always so discouraging to him. And he goes to scan his ticket not thinking anything of it. He's not thinking it's going to be any different than any time prior, and everything changes. Everything changes on this day. His ticket is a winner, and he is suddenly the winner of a $50 million jackpot. Naturally, you know, upon winning that, he's overwhelmed, he's in shock, he's not sure if it's true. He rushes home to tell his wife, and even she is like, you know, you're lying, what are you talking about? I'm here trying to cook, you're interrupting me. And then, you know, once they double check and realize it's real, you know, life changes, right? You go from being, you know, an average working class family to now in possession of millions. And, you know, Sunil obviously thinks this is just a one-time thing. How often does somebody win a lottery multiple times? But he soon realizes that he kind of has that Midas touch, and there's so much, like, they go through a whole bunch of twists and turns as he continues to come across more winnings. But what I really liked about this story is that it felt a lot like a Guyanese sitcom. Sunil and his business partner Ramesh, slash probably best friend I would say too, they have a really interesting dynamic, and they're always cracking jokes, and you know, just they're together all the time basically, and it's quite funny to see their dynamic and the way their relationship kind of changes throughout the book, because Ramesh kind of becomes like Sunil's right hand also in terms of figuring out how to manage all of these finances that he's now come into. But his wife Sushila is also the one who reminds him along the way that even though they have, you know, these winnings and this money, Sunil still has to be mindful. He still has to think of the family and think of who's gonna be, you know, obviously asking him for money and things like that. She's kind of that voice of reason, because of course as Sunil continues you know, to see his touch work, his personality turns rather arrogant along the way as well, which is kind of, I suppose, a natural change if somebody's going to continue to rack up a lot of millions. But it is, again, very comedic in that sense. Fortunately, the one thing that kind of got me is that the book did have a lot of typos and inconsistencies, which were sometimes a little bit hard, of course, to overlook, especially like punctuation and things like that. It kind of disrupted the reading. The story was very fast-paced. It was kind of just one thing after the other happening, which was kind of good in a way because it just keeps you interested. There's always something happening, but I do felt like it jumped from, you know, one situation to the next, to the next, to the next without any sort of smooth transition in between. It was just very one after the other after the other. But like I said, it was overall a very lighthearted, funny story that was certainly meant to, you know, entertain the reader, and I think there was a lot of potential there if it was able to, you know, be revisited and maybe just a little bit of editing done to kind of give it a little bit more, because there was so much potential to what this book could be. So for me, this one was a 3 out of 5. The most recent book that I just finished is called A Silent Life, and this is by Ryhaan Shah. This book was actually on my TBR for quite some time when I came across it just in a search, because I was looking for new Indo-Caribbean books to pick up, and it was just one that really stood out to me, especially because the characters are, it's mainly like a female focused novel, and it certainly didn't disappoint as well. It was incredibly inspiring. So here's a little bit more. Alia is growing up in Guyana, and she has always found herself very drawn to her nanny. She spends her childhood, you know, sitting with her head on her lap, telling her about her dreams, her hopes, her wishes, and, you know, despite her nanny being someone who doesn't really speak much, she's often humming. That's kind of what she does. And her other siblings, Alia's other siblings, don't really take to her, to their nanny either. They kind of think that she's a jumbie or like she's scary and things, but that's not the case for her. She's very drawn to her and just really understands that there's something more, you know, behind the fact that nanny doesn't speak. And also, Alia and her family are Indo-Guyanese and Muslim as well, so I think it's cool that we get like a lot of different representation within this book, within, you know, an Indo-Caribbean family. Like I said, there's this mystery surrounding Nani and Alia's late grandfather, who's known as Pa Nazir, and slowly she begins to start getting these flashbacks that kind of shows her how Nani and Pa Nazir's relationship played out. And it started, of course, as something that was such a beautiful, natural relationship, but due to a lot of their differences in personality, it slowly kind of deteriorated, and she sees that in these flashbacks. She also learns that her Nani was very much the voice of their community. People came to her for help, and she was a leader. So I really like that too, because in this situation, we're not seeing, well, I mean, there's layers to it, but she was an Indo-Caribbean woman who was not one to be quiet or to be silent about things. She was very outspoken and spoke up about political issues and things like that. So it was really cool that she was a very bold character, at least in her younger days. As Alia gets older and, you know, reaches her years where she's about to go off to school, she is awarded a scholarship that takes her over to the UK, and of course her family is incredibly proud of her. Her community is already very proud of her, and they're all expecting her to do very big things. And also it's very clear that she's following in the footsteps of her nanny, whether it was, you know, intentional or not, but it's almost natural that she's just doing this. In the midst of her studies, she meets a very charming young man named Dean, and they get married and start their own family. And then before she knows it, it's been 20 years since she's been back home, and Alia actually ends up having her life and starting her life in the UK instead of coming back home to Guyana. Of course, she does return after a few events that change sort of the life that she's known. She does find herself back home and ready to kind of, you know, unlock the rest of those secrets that she never fully got the answers to in her childhood. So it gets very it gets very poetic and lyrical at times, especially the way that Ryhaan Shah writes. She's very poetic and lyrical, as I said. So I personally really like that. I love that writing style. It brings everything to life. It's very vibrant. The pacing of the novel, I would say it's a slower paced novel, to be honest, but it's absolutely worth it. It's not a slow pace, but it gets boring. I found that I was always really engaged and always caring about Alia's character. Like I mentioned, we really do see, you know, strong Guyanese female characters, even though at points in their life they do struggle with, you know, the fact that they are so outspoken and bold, but they are, again, very strong, very courageous, very loving characters. There's also a layer of the story that really deals with the political climate within Guyana, so if you are familiar with that, or even if you're not familiar with that, I personally found it really cool because you kind of, you know, within Alia's family, you get to see how that affected, especially, you know, the Indian community in Guyana during the time, and we find this out through letters that she receives from her family. So I really thought that was cool. I think it's a nice historical layer, not nice as in what happened, but nice as in, like, again, the historical layer that we see there. Ultimately, the ending might have been my favorite part of the book. That is not that the rest of the book wasn't great, but the ending was absolutely beautiful. It was like a total flashback into you know, Alia's family history, her ancestors, the ones who first came from India to the Caribbean, and their backstory, and how all the generations led into, you know, her generation that you're seeing now. So I thought it was absolutely beautiful and just a 5 out of 5 read for me. That's it for me today, guys. Those are the 3 Indo-Caribbean books that I have read for the start of the year. I am definitely continuing on that trajectory right now with just Caribbean and Indo-Caribbean reads. I think it just, you know, I took a break from it for a bit and was reading other things, but it just feels really nice to kind of come back into, you know, into this area of books. I have a ton of things that I have picked up over the last few months too, so it's really cool that I'm able to get into them now and of course share them. So like I said, that's it for me today, and I will see you guys in my next video. Take care and stay safe. Bye.